Inside the pristine corridors of Serious Innovations, a ring of fluorescent lights pulsed with quiet intensity, illuminating the security checkpoint like a stage. Employees streamed in, scanning their identification cards before heading to their labs and offices. At first glance, the scene resembled any high-tech facility in a bustling metropolis. Yet, hidden behind the polished veneer was a secret that had been brewing for years. A research project that tinkered with elements beyond ordinary human comprehension. Unseen among the crowd were half-elf security guards, their ears ending in subtle points, their eyes uniquely attuned to the illusions of a world few humans ever witnessed. It was an empire of science, perpetually at war with the hidden realms of the supernatural. Marco, one of these new recruits, stood by the checkpoint, scanning the queue for anything out of the ordinary. Despite his imposing physique, his features reflected his elven heritage in delicate ways. Slanted cheekbones, luminous green irises, and elongated ears, just slightly concealed by his trimmed hair. Marco had been genetically engineered for this program. He was designed to keep watch. Not just for ordinary intruders or corporate spies, but also for creatures that could blend in, unseen by mortal eyes. Stories of wraiths, shapeshifters, and fairies who crept through mortal workplaces and sowed havoc had long been relegated to myth. However, with the new half-elf line's capabilities, illusions lost their potency, and hidden threats were finally forced into the open. He tapped a small earpiece connected to the central security station, where Dr. Ava Gentry monitored the facility on a massive bank of screens. Ava had spearheaded the controversial hybrid experiment. She carried an unwavering belief that forces beyond conventional science lurked around them, threatening not just the company's intellectual property, but humanity at large. Through her efforts, Serious Innovations had secured funding to design a breed of guardians, fusing elf DNA acquired through a shadowy dimension gate experiment decades ago with the human genome. The results were extraordinary. These half-elf security officers observed the physical realm and the intangible with equal clarity. More than once, they had caught glimpses of flickering silhouettes and heard whispers that skittered just beyond the range of normal human senses. The extensive hallway leading to the restricted lab area thrummed beneath Marco's feet as he headed for his shift. The overhead lights reflected on the polished floor like shards of a broken mirror. Or at least that was how his newly enhanced eyes perceived it. Everything had a layered nature, and where others saw a shining reflection, he perceived faint outlines of magic in the environment. He had learned early on not to stare too long at these distortions, lest they began to stare back. He still remembered the first time he'd locked eyes with a creature lurking in a corner. He had thought it was an afterimage, a side effect of his augmented sight. But then it leapt, shrieking like 1,000 nails dragged across glass, before dispersing into confetti-like motes of light. That was his first clue that illusions were not always passive. Some illusions possessed an awareness all their own. Ava waited for him by a thick metal door. She offered a tight smile, her usual gesture of encouragement. "Morning, Marco," she began. "I'm going to run your daily scans, then we're upgrading your security clearance. We've had some unusual readings in the sub-basement labs." She paused, briefly rubbing her brow as though to soothe a headache. "The tech team can't figure it out. Your team might be able to see what we can't." Marco nodded. "Have you noticed any strange illusions around the labs?" "Nothing we can confirm," Ava said carefully. "But a few employees have reported fleeting shapes, as if something is prowling in the restricted zones. The cameras pick up only static, so we need you and the others to check." A swish of the door opened onto the lab's interior, where tall glass cylinders rose from floor to ceiling. Glowing stasis pods revealed slender humanoid figures inside, motionless in an artificial slumber. Marco felt a pang of recognition. Inside those glass tubes lay others like him, new hybrids not yet awakened. Even from a distance, he sensed their latent power. Their pointed ears and refined features left no doubt about their origin. Ava guided him to a silver examination chair, hooking him up to a whirring machine that monitored his vitals. Electric pulses scanned his brain activity, measuring everything from magical sensitivity thresholds to basic physical prowess. There was an underlying tension in Ava's posture, as if something weighed on her mind. Many believed the half-elf project was fundamentally unethical. Even within the company, dissent simmered beneath the surface. Attempts to sabotage the program had been thwarted in the past, but Ava suspected that if illusions were floating around the labs now, it could be a sign that an otherworldly entity had infiltrated the facility to push the project toward failure or catastrophe. When the machine finished its evaluation, Ava powered it down. "All good," she said, loosening the straps. "Your readings are stable." She shifted her weight, flipping through a data pad. "I'll be accompanying you down to sub-basement 5. We can't risk sending you there alone. This is bigger than standard security procedures. Are you ready?" Marco stood, rolling his shoulders as if testing each muscle to ensure nothing was amiss. "Ready." They descended using a high-speed elevator lined with an alloy that supposedly neutralized magical infiltration. Marco felt his ears tingle the deeper they went, as if the facility's layers peeled back another dimension of reality. After a series of claustrophobic corridors, they arrived at a large metal vault. A single humming console guarded the entrance, and even from a few feet away, Marco sensed vibrations of illusory interference around the doorframe. Something was indeed present, swirling invisibly, attempting to veil itself from standard security cameras. "Here," said Ava, pressing a keycard and placing her palm on a bioscanner. The vault door groaned as it inched open, revealing a vast, cathedral-like space. Lining the walls were floor-to-ceiling steel cabinets containing prototypes and contractions that fizzled with raw arcs of energy. The air here had a heaviness that pressed against the lungs as if it carried a cosmic weight. Marco's ears twitched. A faint, resonant hum emanated from the far corner, intermittently flickering in and out of his perception. He squinted, channeling his enhanced sight, and discovered something rippling like a heat haze near a table of half-assembled drones. "Over there," he said, pointing. Ava followed his gaze, unable to see anything at first. Then, as if awakened by their scrutiny, the haze solidified into the faint silhouette of a tall, gaunt figure. Its limbs extended in unnatural proportions, and a faint set of shimmering wings flapped soundlessly behind it. Something about its presence was insidious, akin to a predator testing whether it had been discovered. Then it twisted its head and moved, leaving a trail of shimmering footprints behind it. "Is that some kind of fey creature?" Marco asked, keeping his voice low. Ava drew closer. "Possibly. The sub-basement has the highest concentration of arcane energy. It's how we power some of our experimental devices. Conventional security can't detect something built entirely of illusions or glamour. But you can. So be careful." Stepping lightly, Marco advanced. He felt a faint warmth at the corners of his eyes, the telltale sign that his half-elf sight was sharpening. Each step brought more clarity to the figure. Where before it was only a shimmer, now he saw elongated fingers, each tipped with a claw that ended in faint light. The creature stood poised, as if contemplating whether to attack or flee. Fey illusions were notoriously tricky. They could shapeshift at a moment's notice. Marco suspected there might be more than one. He raised a hand and projected calm thoughts, a technique Ava had showed him. Sometimes illusions recognized emotion as a threat. He hoped to keep it from vanishing or turning hostile. But the figure simply tilted its head. Then, in a voice like a whisper of wind through tall grass, it spoke, though neither Ava nor the device registers gave any direct indication of audible sound. Marco's half-elf hearing picked up a swirl of words that formed directly in his consciousness. Leave, danger, not to be seen, by mortal eyes. Then it laughed, a haunting, hollow sound, and disappeared in a burst of swirling shapes. A moment later, a surge of alarm signals flashed on the lab consoles, indicating a sudden, precipitous buildup of unknown magical energy. Ava rushed over to a control panel. "Some kind of meltdown is happening in the energy conduits," she said. "It must have tampered with our system. If we don't stabilize the system, we'll have a catastrophic discharge. The entire sub-basement could blow in minutes." Before Marco could respond, the vault door slammed shut with a deafening clang. Red lights flooded the room, accompanied by a harsh, pulsating alarm. The emergency lockdown had activated. He glanced around. With illusions swirling about, they'd have to rely on his abilities and Ava's quick mind to free themselves and quell the meltdown. "Check the conduit array," Ava directed, her voice quivering with urgency. "We have multiple energy lines running from the main reactor to the sub-basement's magical equipment. We need to manually close them, or they'll keep feeding the meltdown." Marco sprinted across the room, weaving between crates of half-assembled technology. His vision flickered with afterimages as illusions lingered, coaxing him to slip. Every so often he saw a flash of the gaunt figure reappearing at the periphery of his sight, vanished by the time he turned his head. The meltdown's pressure was tangible, thrumming in the floors and the churning air. He found a junction box near the wall, its surface flickering with arcane rune. Quickly, he twisted the valves to cut off the channels feeding the meltdown. The runes glowed hot white, resisting him as if they had been harnessed by something else's will. He gritted his teeth, forcing the final lever into place. Sparks flew and his left palm burned with sudden pain, but the conduit snapped shut. "That's one," he shouted back to Ava. "How many are there in total?" "5," Ava called from across the room, pressing frantic commands on a console. "2 of them are automatically sealed. 3 more need manual override. Hurry!" Marco dashed to the second junction box near a rack of caged components. The illusions were thicker here, swirling like a vortex of shimmering shards. He steeled himself and powered through. As he reached for the lever, the gaunt figure emerged from the swirling illusions. Up close, its face appeared hollow except for 2 pinpoints of scintillating light where eyes would be. With spidery speed, it lunged at him, face twisted into an expression of rage. Marco flung himself backward, narrowly avoiding a slash from those lethal claws. It hissed, multiple illusions flickering around it as though it commanded an entire swarm of ephemeral ghosts. Adrenaline coursed through him as he turned sideways, scanning for anything that could serve as a weapon. Spotting a metal rod leaning against the wall, he seized it and swung it through the swirling illusion. The rod crackled with a sizzling energy, forcing the creature to recoil. Under normal circumstances, illusions had little to fear from mundane weapons. Yet the sub-basement's charged environment meant many objects had absorbed ambient arcane energy, transforming them into makeshift conduits. The creature screeched, ephemeral flesh sizzling before it retreated, dissolving once more into shimmering fragments. With the path cleared, Marco yanked the lever of the second junction box. Sparks sputtered, but the meltdown's whine softened. 1 more to go. He pivoted, scanning the space for the final manual shut-off. Ava waved at him from a far corner, indicating the last junction box dwarfed by a tall, cylindrical device that glowed malevolently. Without hesitation, he sprinted across the metal grating. Each footfall resounded against the meltdown's thunderous resonance. His ears rang with the intensity of the illusions swirling around them. This time, as he approached, he saw not 1, but 2 shapes coalescing. A pair of tall, lean figures emerged, each with the same elongated limbs and watery, shifting faces. Ava's anxious voice crackled over an intercom speaker. "Marco, do you need backup?" He stifled a grim laugh. "I might," he admitted. Deciding that time was short, he gestured for her to approach with caution as she navigated swirling illusion. The figures advanced, their steps unnervingly synchronized. They radiated a predatory confidence, as if they had cornered their prey. Marco and Ava stood back to back, rods gripped in their hands. The meltdown's intermittent flashes illuminated each swirl of dust, giving the space a surreal glow. With a screech that echoed in both the physical and psychic realm, the illusions attacked. Their speed was blinding, shifting forms in a barrage of stabs and lunges. Marco parried with his rod, his half-elf reflexes guiding him through a lethal dance. Meanwhile, Ava dodged their flicker-like shifts, slamming her rod into the illusions with surprising finesse. Sparks flew each time metal connected with ephemeral flesh. Slashes of bright color erupted in the air, forming a neon swirl of combat. It felt as though they fought in two dimensions at once, one physical, one intangible. Between trading blows, Marco edged closer to the junction lever. He thrusted his rod to block another tearing swipe and, with a surge of desperation, twisted his body to reach the lever. Summoning all his strength, he yanked it downward. A brilliant white flare erupted from the console, followed by a thunderous rumble that coursed through the entire sub-basement. The meltdown's warning sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by a gentle hum. Tension uncoiled from the air, and it felt as though a great, suffocating weight had lifted. The illusions that battled them flickered, then screamed, bodies destabilizing into flurries of glowing dust, scattering across the floor in shimmering motes. Ava stood, breath heaving, rod still clenched in her right hand. "We did it," she murmured, wiping sweat from her brow. Her eyes darted toward the swirling fragments. "What do you think they were?" Marco shook his head. "Some variant of Fey illusions, maybe. They seem drawn to magical energy, especially the type we produce here." He lowered his rod. "They were using illusions to sabotage the facility, maybe to end the half-elf program." Before either one could relax, the overhead speakers crackled, releasing a slow exhale of static. A panicked voice erupted through the garbled feed. "Sub-basement meltdown neutralized, but we have sightings of illusions on the upper floors now. They're everywhere. Security Team 3 is requesting assistance." Ava's eyes flicked to Marco, fear and determination mingling on her face. "If these illusions are all over the building now, we have to secure the remaining floors. We can't let them sabotage other crucial labs." The pair hurried back to the elevator, which clanked unsteadily back up the levels. As they ascended, the swirling illusions pressed their presence in the corners of Marco's vision, as if sneaking through vents and doorways. When the doors finally opened, the scene that greeted them was chaos. The once spotless corridor was marred by scorch marks and shattered glass. Human security officers, powerless to see the illusions fully, fired blindly at flickers of movement. Scientists huddled in corners, clutching data tablets like lifeline. The illusions themselves, partially visible under the new emergency lighting, darted about in fluid, haunting motions, sowing confusion. Marco stepped forward, raising his voice to the security team. "Aim for where I point," he shouted, brandishing the metal rod that still held residual energy. "Trust me when I say they're there." He dashed toward the illusions, each step fueled by a fierce resolve that came from knowing he was one of the few who could confront them. Across the corridor, he caught sight of Alicia, another half-elf guard from the pilot program. Her silver hair, drawn back in a tight braid, whipped around as she deflected a series of swipes from something that flickered like a living shadow. She beckoned him over. "We're overrun," she said, panting. "I've held them back, but I can't see them all at once." Ava stepped in, analyzing the environment. "We can create a disruption wave," she said, typing commands into her handheld device. "If I recalibrate the building's power grid, I might generate a magical feedback that temporarily nullifies illusions." "That could also cause a citywide blackout," Alicia cautioned, knocking aside a lunging wraith-like shape. "But go for it if there's no alternative." Already, more illusions swarmed, climbing walls and flooding the space like a tide of living nightmares. They merged and fused, forming an eerie, monstrous shape that towered with multiple clawed limbs. Marco and Alicia shared a brief look. They were the product of the biotech company's best efforts, half-elf watchers at the crossroads of mortal and immortal realms. The time had come to prove their worth. With uncanny speed, both half-elves charged the towering illusion, rods crackling with stolen energy. The monstrous figure roared with discordant voices, a cacophony that rattled the fluorescent lights overhead. Tentacles of twisting illusions lashed out, snapping at them with gut-wrenching swiftness. But the half-elves danced, limbs moving in perfect synergy, guided by instincts far older than the concrete and glass environment. Each strike of their rods disrupted a portion of the creature's form, sending arcs of shimmering debris fluttering to the floor. Just as they began to gain the upper hand, it shifted shape, condensing into a concentrated mass of howling wind. The corridor atmosphere darkened like a storm cloud. Alicia was flung off her feet, landing hard against the wall. Marco braced himself against the assault, forced to one knee. He saw a swirl of illusions heading for Ava, who was crouched by a wall panel. She was furiously typing commands, presumably to trigger the feedback loop. If she was attacked now, the entire plan would fail. Drawing on a surge of inner strength, Marco hurled himself into the swirling mass. He connected the rod to its center, feeling an immense jolt as raw energy coursed through his arms. The illusions scattered into a storm of glittering shrapnel, some blowing past him to snap at the others. Meanwhile, Alicia mustered her own strength, swinging her rod in a broad arc. Each blow tore through the illusions, diminishing the swirling tide. Then, Ava slammed her fist onto the final command on the panel. All at once, the overhead lights flickered in a rapid strobe pattern. A thunderous vibration hummed through the walls, and a wave of intangible force expanded outward, passing through every corridor and open space. The illusions froze mid-lunge, shapes fracturing like broken holograms. With a final hideous shriek, they dissolved, leaving behind only swirling motes that drifted to the floor before vanishing entirely. Silence hung in the corridor, punctured only by the hiss of damaged electronics. The security team groaned, some dropping to their knees in exhaustion. Scientists emerged cautiously from their hiding places, scanning for any lingering threats. Ava slowly rose to her feet, eyes still glued to the readouts on her device. "Looks like the building's stable," she breathed, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I've shut down external access to the main power lines. We won't have illusions popping up like that again, at least not from an internal meltdown." Marco offered a hand to Alicia, helping her to her feet. She winced, pressing a hand to a bruised shoulder. Still, a grin tugged at her lips. "We did it," she said. "First real test of our capabilities, and we're still standing." Surveying the corridor, Marco could hardly believe the destruction. If illusions of this caliber were able to infiltrate the facility, it meant that an entire hidden world was aware of Sirius Innovations' breakthroughs. The meltdown in the sub-basement had been their big play. A sabotage attempt that nearly succeeded, yet the half-elves had proven that illusions and supernatural threats could indeed be exposed. And now they knew that these powers were no myth. They were lethal, cunning, and real. Dr. Ava Gentry approached the group. Thick worry lines etched her face, but relief gradually replaced her anxiety. "I wanted us to be prepared for a smaller infiltration, but I never anticipated something of this scale," she admitted. "Let's regroup in the main conference room. We can debrief and figure out how to move forward." In the aftermath of the chaos, it took several hours for the building to be deemed secure. Tools and devices scattered in the corridors were collected. Wounded security members received medical attention. Intercom announcements directed employees back to safe zones. The other half-elves in the pilot program, bruised but unbroken, joined Marco, Alicia, and Ava around a circular table in the conference room. Holographic displays flickered overhead, showing damage assessments in real time, along with sensor data capturing the illusions that had invaded. Ava stood at the center, clearing her throat. "It's evident now that illusions of this magnitude pose a serious threat. Not just to this company, but perhaps to our entire city," she began. "The meltdown fiasco proves that the half-elf security program is essential. If there's any doubt about its necessity, today's events should erase it." She tapped a console, causing a digital record of the illusions to appear. We need a strategy to deal with future incursions. Our success today was due to quick thinking and a bit of luck. We need to formalize our protocols. With the meltdown sabotage attempt, we should also investigate if any external parties orchestrated this. Alicia nodded. I'll coordinate with local law enforcement about supernatural threats. We might face some skepticism, but the evidence is mounting. Outside the reinforced windows of the conference room, day had transitioned to an uneasy dusk. The city's skyscrapers shone with vibrant neon lights, oblivious to the hidden war that had taken place within Serious Innovations' walls. Marco stared out at the horizon, reflecting on his place in the world. He was neither fully human nor fully elf, yet it was precisely that hybrid nature, that bridging of two realms, that allowed him to protect people from beings they could not see or fathom. As the group dispersed to manage cleanup and reorganize security protocols, Ava stopped him. "Marco," she said quietly, "I want to thank you. Today could have gone differently if you weren't here, if none of you were." He nodded, recalling the swirling illusions, blood pounding in his ears during every confrontation. "I'm just thankful to have been able to do my part," he replied softly. "I'm starting to realize how important it is that people like us exist." Ava's gaze turned distant. "You'll be on the front lines of something bigger than any of us. There's no telling how extensive these hidden realms are, or how determined they are to remain concealed. But we'll keep pushing forward, shining a light on what's been veiled." In the hours that followed, the facility's power grid was partially brought back online. Scientists meticulously compiled fresh data from the illusion's appearance. Analyzing residue with advanced sensors, they identified the magical signature as closely related to certain fey manifestations inscribed in old texts, but with unique characteristics that suggested a new breed of creature, or perhaps an older breed, newly awakened. And with each reading, it became clear that simply driving them off once would not end the threat. Additional infiltration attempts were almost guaranteed. Marco took a moment to rest by a small observation deck. He gazed through a thick glass window at the city below. Lights glimmering, vehicles weaving their nighttime routes, ordinary lives continuing as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. His half-elven senses could pick out faint glimmers, intangible shapes weaving in and out of rooftop shadows. It dawned on him that illusions didn't inhabit just the sub-basement of one biotech company. They were everywhere, ubiquitously crossing the threshold from folklore into reality. People just never noticed until the illusions decided to strike. A gentle footstep behind him signaled Alicia's arrival. She appeared thoughtful, eyes scanning the same skyline. "Do you ever wonder if we'll be accepted?" she asked, quiet. "We're genetic hybrids, walking the line between two worlds. Will humans see us as guardians or as experiments gone too far?" he sighed. "We can't force their perceptions. All we can do is our jobs. Protect them, expose threats. Over time, I hope they'll see not something monstrous, but individuals who can help. It's the best we can do." Alicia offered a faint smile, then turned away, heading to rejoin the others. Through the window, a cluster of lights flickered in the distance. Marco focused, noticing an ephemeral silhouette drifting near a distant skyscraper. His heart thumped. The illusions had already spread beyond their lab, beyond the walls of Serious Innovations. The challenge would be far broader than he'd initially imagined. As midnight approached, the Security Command Center bustled with new protocols. All half-elf personnel were placed on alert shifts across the facility. Additional scanners, calibrated to detect illusions, were installed at each entrance. Ava oversaw new training modules aimed at teaching standard security how to work alongside the half-elves more effectively, relaying instructions with precision. The entire building was turning into a fortress, a bulwark against threats no one could fully predict. Behind locked doors in secure conference rooms, heated debates erupted among company executives, some living in denial about the infiltration's real cause. They argued about the ramifications of admitting that illusions were real and that the biotech sector was dealing with something beyond normal science. Ava fought to maintain control of the half-elf program, championing its success as not just beneficial, but absolutely necessary. Witness statements and security footage from the meltdown were sobering evidence. Despite protests and moral quandaries, the majority recognised that a new age of security was necessary. The illusions had made the old rules obsolete. The following week, everything changed. A wave of rumours hit social media, reportings of ghostly figures, shimmering shapes, and unexplained phenomena in corporate high-rises across the city. News agencies capitalised on the sensational claims, broadcasting segments with ominous background music and half-baked commentary, while official channels tried to downplay the seriousness, attributing it to mass hysteria or pranks. The public's fear was palpable. Meanwhile, outside Serious Innovations, small gatherings of protesters formed. Some accused the company of dabbling in things best left alone. Modern necromancy, they called it, and others demanded a public explanation for the illusions. One morning, as Marco arrived for his shift, he saw that the protest had grown, faces pressed against handheld signs that read, "Stop playing God" and "No more secrets." Security drones hovered overhead, scanning the crowd. He recognized the frustration and fear etched into people's expressions. Nothing was as it once seemed. Just as illusions were forced out of hiding, so too was the research that let half-elves exist among humans. In the lobby, Alicia and Ava were already in conference with a group of city officials, presumably discussing the practicalities of illusions now that they were out in the open. Security detail flanked the hallway, stern faces set in determination. Yet a flicker of relief hit Marco when he realized that acceptance was brewing, slowly but undeniably. Among the officials, he spotted a few nods while Ava demonstrated the half-elves' capability. One official tried a handshake with Alicia, a small but significant bridge between two worlds. Yes, the illusions posed a threat. Yes, the city was in the midst of an upheaval. But in that handshake, in that small moment of mutual understanding, Marco perceived a doorway. If illusions could no longer remain hidden, and if half-elf guardians could prove their worth, perhaps a new era of coexistence was dawning. This was not a neat ending, but rather a threshold. The city was forced to confront the supernatural, and the guardians, he, Alicia, and others would stand watch, making sure illusions and arcane threats did not consume the world they were sworn to protect. Marco took his position at the security post, scanning the energetic swirl of people and subtle shapes that darted at the fringe of mortal eyesight. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Bound by neither purely human nor purely elven constraints, he was part of something greater. The illusions had been exposed. The old illusions had lost their advantage. Whatever battles lay ahead, he and the other half-elf guards stood as the living proof that mankind's ingenuity, combined with the mysteries of magic, could forge a new path forward. And so, under the gleam of fluorescent lights and humming machinery, that path began.